Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Parry, and I'm going to spend about 45 minutes talking with you about a world that's inhabited by both man, women, and machines. And it's getting very much more complicated because of all the interfaces that we're going to have to deal with. So we'll talk about that. After that, I'd like to talk about some of the psychological aspects associated with this interface, and at the end, where the business opportunities lie. Let me start by saying the reason I call this the age of the Novacene is actually something that James Lovelock, the famous author, has put in his latest book. And I do recommend the book. It's actually quite small. Look at that, very, very thin. You can read it in a short afternoon. And what he says is, look, should digital technology be viewed as a new life form, sharing our ecosystem and co-evolving with us? Are humans defining technology, or is technology defining humans? And basically what he's doing is rephrasing what Richard Dawkins once said. He said that a chicken is an egg's way of producing another egg. And he says, is a human a computer's way of making another computer? And as we evolve together, these questions are going to be very pertinent indeed. Lovelock himself predicts that a benevolent, eco-friendly electronic artificial superintelligence will someday become the dominant life form on the planet. And he envisages organisms, and this is us, I think, will be made of engineered materials, both organic and inorganic, part flesh and part machine. Well, we're not quite there yet, so we've got to manage the interface between that sort of environment. So what I'll do is just take you through a few things. The first thing, let's have a look at what's happening in the world that is going to actually lead to this future. Well, I think we've seen in the wake of COVID that we're heading for essentially what is a two-block world, one led by the United States and its allies, and the other by China. And I think it was trending that way anyway. COVID has accelerated and amplified what has been happening before. And essentially what's going to happen is we're going to be in a connected but contested world, one where we're going to have to constantly look at whether we want to cooperate where we can, or indeed compete where we must. Everything from strategic through to commercial environments. I think what we are going to see in the wake of COVID is a lot more onshoring back to countries of origin, a lot of local to local business, and a restructuring of supply chains. That means there'll be a pressing need for automation in advanced societies and economies, because a lot of us are aging in our societies. And of course, a lot of the manual work can be done by very basic artificial intelligence platforms. We also see now that we're in a technology arms race. We've got a lot of investment going into Chinese and Asian businesses in relation to this, and a lot, of course, in the developed world economy. We're still going to have the problem with cyber security. And what I foresee is we'll have a balkanized internet, an internet that is split into various parts, because the main internet environment will become so hostile. Now, the other thing that's quite interesting is that everything and everyone will be detectable within the next 10 years or so, either because of the signature that we give off, our facial features, the electronic footprint that we have, or indeed the sensors that states and companies can bring to bear. One of the things we will see, of course, in this very sharp competition between China and its allies and the United States and its allies, is China actually developing its own high-end tech industries. And they've got this program called Made in China 2025, where they seek to produce at home the leading top technological advantages for China. And they're not intending to import any of this stuff from the rest of us. Let's see just what that means. If you put China up to the top right, where the center of the sun is, you can see where a lot of the countries with their investments currently in technology and finance will get burnt as a result of this Made in China 2025. And we have to prepare for this competition, because you can see that tariffs and sanctions and various issues will be applied on both sides of this two-block world barrier. There'll be a lot of tectonic friction, and you can see the countries that are going to have to absolutely compete within the free world bloc and also across the divide into the other bloc as well. In the United States, you can see there, you can see the United Kingdom sitting not too bad, but some countries, Japan, Germany, others very close in. South Korea, most exposed of all. As I said, a lot more surveillance going on, and most of that will be projected from space. And the simple fact of life is, this is going to be a very active and again contested environment up in space. And we're going to have something like 50,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. Elon Musk, of course, is contributing a lot of those satellites with the chains. And by 2035, you're going to have a very, very busy environment and you're going to be able to see satellites being used for surveillance, for communications, for timing, and of course for military activity as well. We've also got the surveillance capitalism from the major platform providers in the West, the Googles, the Microsofts. You've also got the state-based ones in Russia, China, and other countries. And by 2035, as I said, a lot of us are going to be universally detectable through either satellites, as you can see, or other forms of sensor that will be out there. And what this means is we're going to be managing an increasingly complex machine interface between ourselves and trying to mediate that, to filter stuff out, to make sure that we're not overwhelmed with the amount of data, and of course, making sure that we can exploit the technology that we have at our disposal. The problem is, as we've seen throughout today, technology is accelerating and it's disrupting practically everything we do. Every aspect of our life is being disrupted. What is certain is that we are in an age more than any other that is seeing the arrival of extreme technology, whether it's 3D printing, AI altered imaging, quantum computing coming in very soon, and other quantum applications, wearables, as you can see on the back of this woman's neck. We may even have nuclear fusion by the 2040s, giving us 1,000 years of electricity if that comes to fruition. And at the bottom right, obviously, nanotechnology already with us. But all of you, all of us, know that we're in a world now of big data, machine learning, and also the approaching Internet of Things. And that means that it's going to be a world that is going to be shaped and defined by artificial intelligence. And practically everything that you can see on that slide is being altered even as we speak now. Lawyers are not safe, accountants are not safe, even designers and doctors aren't. And I'm glad to say that journalists aren't either. But right at the bottom, we're getting specialist reports now, which previously would have taken months to filter and write, are being done now in less than a week. We're seeing spatial computing able to bring us all sorts of graphics and predictive analytics to make sure that we don't get our strategy and other things wrong at the same time. Even on the medical side, there's a huge number of things that AI is now entering into. And our ability to mediate this technology, I'm afraid at the moment, is very immature. And we've got to look for new ways of providing visualization and implementation to make sure that humans can actually benefit across the scale and up and down the stack in every aspect of this artificial intelligence. And you can see things that 10 years ago, including synthetic biology, self-medication, big data and genomics being applied that weren't even considered conceptually sound. On the education side, we've seen, especially during COVID, the way in which it's transformed the whole education sector. Knowledge transfer now takes place predominantly on the internet. You've seen a lot more home learning and socialization. This has led to continuous learning and distance learning for people who are actually doing normal jobs. And the new cry now is blended learning, combining both humans and machine-led technology in both socializing and doing knowledge transfer. And unless universities adapt, they're going to die because people won't be prepared to invest the amount of money that we have in the past in these new sort of products that are available. We're also in a world now that is going to be populated by large numbers of robotics and unmanned features. You can see the ones there that are fairly basic, but here are some that are actually out on the ground already, delivering stuff and actually providing assistance, both medical and for search and rescue as well. And all of us know, I think, that it's not just a case of the civilian world adopting these unmanned vehicles. The military are as well. In fact, they're pioneering the use right now in every dimension of warfare, whether it's in the air or under the sea. And you can see that tiny one, that tiny little microflyer that provides you with intelligence in buildings and along streets, absolutely tiny, but it's aerial sticking out behind. Now, some of the limitations of humans in this can be shown when you're using drones, like the one here at the bottom left, in swarming formations. You can see on here, this is what was used at the Sochi, not the Sochi, the South Korean Winter Olympics. These sorts of shapes and sizes, they can be used for tricks like this, but also, of course, they can be used for warfare. But our ability to be able to do that manually, to have manual reversion, to do it without having a machine between us and them, is getting increasingly difficult. Even to have any human involvement in this now is becoming very challenging indeed. So how are we trying to mitigate this? Well, partly, as you know, we're in the first generation of wearables. I've got wearables at the moment. I've got a spectacle on. You can see Prince Harry there in happier days. He's wearing a monocle, which is giving data right into his right eye. And we've seen variations on Google Glass and other features like that. And they're developing. You can see them commercially now. We're wearing them on our clothes. We're wearing them on our bodies. And things are getting even more subtle here and sophisticated. You can put them across your skin and almost like tattoos on your arm and on your fingers as well. And where it's all coming together, you can see very sophisticated applications. Now, here's a Chinese police officer who not only has a Google Glass type spectacles on which to read the data, it's also linked into artificial intelligence, facial recognition that she can use in order to be able to see who people are and classify them, whether they're obviously illegal or not. Now, the next move, of course, is to get us into implantables. Some people today, especially in the military, are already wearing implantables that can do all sorts of things. They can monitor, that they can basically identify problems associated with the body they are inhabiting. They also target cancer cells. They can issue drugs, as you can see bottom right. And this is leading edge now, implantables. If you dare go down this route, Elon Musk has got an offer for you. He'll actually put an implant into your brain. Now, this is really actually on the Wild West side. All of us think that, I think. I wouldn't want to be the guinea pig, but this has to be the way ahead, the way we actually connect. Shades of the Matrix here, shades of all sorts of science fiction, but it has been conceptually proven, and this must be the way to go, because we're heading for digitized organs. As you can see on the top left there, you can see an eye that actually works outside of the body. It's now being fitted. You've seen the various parts of the heart at top right, and that very tiny implantable that can actually monitor and regulate organs if you have to. And in terms of digital twinning, you can see the whole body put onto a chip in order to be able to monitor what is going on within any particular body. So, humans and machines. Let's have some facts of life about this. Okay, we've got to be aware that automation replaces tasks. It doesn't replace work in total. And as we know, many manual tasks are being replaced at the moment, but look at this. Less than 5% of jobs consist of activities that are 100% automatable. And the problem is that traditional human-machine interfaces can't effectively contextualize and allow for contingency and the unexpected. So in future, we're going to have to be able to blend the physical and the digital. And that's got to be based on a constant cross-exchanging of information between essentially the human that wants the task done and the machine that is actually going to do the task for it, within safety, within regulation, and within the dimensions of what the output is. Now, many of us at the moment are familiar with digital assistants. That sort of thing now is probably entry level. But the problem is these ways of actually interfacing with machines don't suit humans entirely. They're actually built to facilitate things for humans. And the old idea for machines, and the old idea that everything's intuitive seems to have faded. And the more intuitive we can make the interface, the better. One of the things that's quite impressive I've seen recently is the Atlas University at Colorado, Boulder. They're now using this HoloBot, linked, as you can see, to a much better interface through these glasses. And they can actually interact with a drone and actually reprogram the drone while that is going on, so it can retask it. So really sophisticated interface for the current period. Now, the military, as you'd expect, and some of our emergency services are well up the slope on this one. There you see a UK Coast Guard helicopter that is integrating a drone with its operations at the moment. And at the top left, that's a future combat aeroplane, which will have a series of drones, which it will control through the human interface in the manned cockpit. Or if it isn't manned, that aircraft, it will be done in an open architecture system. But that is absolutely the way we're going at the moment. So the next thing, those of you who come from San Francisco will know that Safe AI is building an autonomous construction site at the moment, which allows human oversight, but machines doing all the work and making sure that it's staying safe. Now, what's going to transform all of this, in my view, is the development of augmented reality. And for those of you who are not familiar with the various terms, I've actually put the definition up. But augmented reality, as well as virtual reality, are going to transform this interface. And I think those of you who work in this sector will know how we'll be able to achieve that. But the problem is, again, the issue is that the emphasis is on the technology side, not on the human side. And I'll explain why we need to actually have more emphasis on the human side in a minute. Now, of course, if you want augmented and virtual reality, you can have mixed reality with all the benefits that you can see on the right-hand side there, the simulation and stimulation combined, and the ability to look at things without actually constructing the real thing, either in a lab or in a factory. And these visualizations are very much the way to go in future, it seems to me. Now, what's really interesting with AR and VR is the extent to which we're already using them for mission rehearsal. Combat pilots, quarterbacks even, and a number of other people are starting to use them. In fact, they've been using them for some time now to visualize how they're going to be either on missions or playing in games. And the advantage of virtual reality is that because users' brains are treating the experience they're having as psychologically real, they're psychologically aroused in a way that is similar to what occurs in real experience. Because when we think, the parts of the brain that are associated with body movements become activated in our brain. And that means that people can learn better by doing rather than watching. But also those that learn best are simulating the motor actions in their brain that they would do for real. And many quarterbacks now in American football are spending their weeks before games actually involved in virtual reality, where they're actually going through the motions. And if you remember, when you started to learn to ride a bike, you started thinking about where you were going to put your feet on the pedals, you thought about the handlebars, you worried about the balance. Well, when you go through a VR, you start pushing that sort of thing to the back and you let the force be with you. And just as on a bike, you don't worry about the peripherals, you just think about what you're doing overall. And some of the quarterbacks that we've interviewed in relation to this say, you know, I don't even think about the detail. I don't even see the detail anymore. I just know what the whole big picture is. And the reason that these expert level players can so efficiently process all this information that they've amassed through practice, study, and gameplay is that they're able to create and call upon extremely refined mental representations, not just what they've done on the practice field, but in terms of virtual reality, where their opposition has actually been put in the same space as them. They get feedback and they're able to repeat it every time till they get it right. Just going down the list, you can actually use this for interviews to get that right. In the theatre, you don't have to practice with your other actors there. You can even actually create situations of empathy, and you can see what we've got at the bottom there. Somebody's been aged digitally. How does it feel? If you're in a virtual reality situation, you can't actually move just as you could as a youngster. And what's really interesting from a business point of view, when people have been asked to walk in other people's shoes in virtual reality, you found that there's been an 18% increase in 20 to 30-year-olds in actually putting in place arrangements for their pension. So it actually has a commercial advantage as well. What's even more interesting is that you can use VR for psychological therapy. The really interesting thing here is that obviously things like 9/11 or combat, many patients were having trouble reconnecting with their memories, either because they were limited by their imaginative capacity or because they were so traumatized they wouldn't actually let themselves think about the memories. So with 9/11, combat veterans, you can use VR in particular to bring them closer to reality, to heighten their emotions by programming real seeming environments and put them in touch with their memories, their real sensory memories. And as you can see, because our memories are collections of verbal narratives and sensory rich experiences, it's both the talking it out and experiencing the original trauma and coming to terms with it, which actually makes a difference. Now, the other thing about VR is that it actually induces some sort of ways of thinking that aren't actually natural. So this is an interface that we really have to work on, because psychologically, we're not producing, in some ways we're producing the real world, in other ways we're not. Now, this is a film from 1895, and it's the arrival of a train in Paris, and it was filmed, and it's one of the first black and white sort of cinema films. And when this train came along the track, half the audience actually put up their hands in horror and dived under the seat because they thought the train was coming out of the screen at them. And in fact, VR technology has a tendency to do that if you're not careful. So what we're seeing now is you find that people who've been in VR or AR situations, their interactions in the physical world change as well. And it's associated with social inhibitions. And you'll find that people who've been witness to or been asked to take part in experimentation in immoral acts are obsessive about cleaning themselves afterwards. They use wipes and they wash their hands and things like that. And that's because VR experiences mimic actual reality and induce similar forms of thought of behavior. But the problem is that it's not actually like real life. We've had some real problems in dealing with driverless cars, for example, and the decisions that pilots would make in an emergency situation. We go through it in VR and we find that as soon as you introduce a human in the real world, it isn't like that. So experiences in VR are not yet a good proxy for what happens in real life. But we get some odd behaviors. People avoid sitting on a chair, for example, in a room that they've just seen an avatar sitting on while they've been on VR. And people's approaches, particularly in VR, are affected by having an avatar in the room, as if they had a real person in the room. For example, it affects how people walk, how they talk, where they turn their head. Their whole body language changes. And even doing easy tasks in the presence of an avatar is quite difficult. We found in an experiment that doing simple anagrams, not a problem. Put an avatar in the room with you in virtual reality, can't do it so easily. So there's all sorts of inhibitions that are going on. Another thing that was quite interesting is that when you had avatars sitting on seats in an experiment, when we turned off the VR and people just walked around the room, people consciously wouldn't sit on seats that avatars had been sitting on before. It's quite extraordinary. So there's a number of things that we don't understand that we're going to have to deal with as we come down the line and this becomes more sophisticated. Now, getting back to the difference between reality and virtual reality, we did a couple of experiments. We did some with some people at the Naval War College in the United States, and we found that in virtual reality, people were prepared to take more risks than they would in reality. When we went to Wall Street, we actually said to people, look, here's a load of money, start trading with that. and here is some virtual money in a virtual space. Start trading with that. Well, interestingly, the guys and women with the real money, they actually made 22% more. So there's something going on here which we have to sort out. Similarly, if we show children violence going on in virtual reality, they tend to beat up dolls and they beat up other sort of inanimate objects when they get out into real life again. I hear a lot about the desensitization to violence. If you see a lot of that in VR and video gaming, that doesn't tend to happen, to tell you the truth. And we get a situation where certainly you can improve your ability, for example, to fire a gun. Anders Behring Breivik, he's the guy who conducted a massacre in Norway in July 2011. He played violent games, particularly Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, with a pistol-shaped controller. And although we don't think it actually led to him being more violent and doing what he did, what it did do was increase his shooting skills and encouraged him to go for the head as a shot. And so you can see how certain things like The Matrix, Ready Player One, Neuromancer, all these things roll over from VR, but there is not any real concrete evidence to say that they increase the level of violence in people in real life. What you do get, of course, is reality blurring. Some of the people who've come out of VR experiments say, you know, my approach to what happens in real life is slightly different. Everything feels superficial, and in some cases they say slightly unreal. It's almost as if they're in a dream for a while after they come out of immersive VR. Now, what's interesting with children, children tend to engage in VR with their prefrontal cortex, and that's associated with emotion and behavior regulation. It's not completely developed in children, of course, and they're notoriously susceptible to reality blurring and false memories when they're exposed to virtual reality. We did an experiment, for example, where we had kids swimming with whales in a virtual reality experience, and 38% of them were convincing us that they'd actually been to SeaWorld to see an orca and actually had touched one when in fact they hadn't. So some interesting things going on in that space, as you can imagine. Okay, the other big problem we've got in relation to the man-machine interface at the moment, of course, is the amount of fake and false and polluted data that is being put into a lot of information systems, which are being taken into virtual and augmented reality platforms. Here's a classic one. This is, as you can see, this is the shoot down of the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine, and some Russian troll has managed to put a Ukrainian fighter aircraft firing a missile, and as you can see, it looks as if it's going to shoot down the aeroplane. I think we're all aware of fake images. There's some classic examples there. All these are now feeding into a lot of our big data systems. Here is a video. I won't keep it on for long, but this is not a true video. It's a fake.
But to seize the opportunities of the future, we must first understand the failures of the past. For many years, our citizens...
Now, that's good enough to convince most people. A lot of you will know the software that's involved in that. Very convincing video. All this stuff now is being taken into our major ecosystems. And of course, the whole cyber situation in future is going to get immensely more complicated when we get into artificial intelligence. And once we apply artificial intelligence to cyber, it becomes totally different in terms of the way we're going to have to deal with it. We get automated hacking, interactive engagement on social media, deepfake and speech synthesis, which means all those pictures and all those speech vectors suddenly become weaponized. You get targeted spear phishing attacks, open source and social media web scraping on a huge scale, which exposes both organizations and individuals. Adversarial example induce confusion, so you won't actually see the source of where it's coming from or even the origin or anything else. The poisoning and planting of data, we've mentioned that. But more importantly, the adaptive cloaking of malware with other plausible and wholly reliable data, contacts, and messages. So you won't be able to see at first sight whether that's the case. You can see how exposed human beings are to this machine interface at the moment. And of course, adversarial machine learning to evade malware classifiers. Now, my view is that I think what's going to happen is we're going to end up with a partitioned internet, not just because states will say, look, we just can't be safe now in this very ragged and imperfect internet. I think even companies now with big data applications, artificial intelligence, algorithmic processes are going to say, look, we're probably going to have our own ecosystem where we feel safe, and we'll have very, very ragged interfaces with this internet. One of the other threats to us, of course, now is the ability electronically to jam, to manipulate, and to spoof. And I think this is underestimated, to tell you the truth. There's a lot of commercial threat out there. If you put everything in the back of a Land Rover or a Jeep, you can take it to the middle of a city, and you can take out most of the Wi-Fi and cordless systems that are operating around the place. So be warned, this is something that I think that is coming on the way. And I think the final point that I think we need to make in terms of the way our ecosystem runs is who controls access and data. And we've seen recently attempts to close down certain books and documents, public conversations on social media. Just think of having some of those machines inside your body dispensing drugs on command. What happens if the person who controls the access and the data actually says, well, actually, this is a section of the population that doesn't deserve or is not entitled to treatment. We all know we get monitored by the data platforms, by the state. And now, in an age where everything can be digitally remastered and constructed, where does the truth lie? And this creates huge amount of problems psychologically along the edge between machine and humans. Okay, next thing, I'm going to talk about some of the psychological aspects of the way we do business. Everybody says people can't take technology at the rate it's going at the moment. I agree with them, it's going too fast. But once we believed that if trains went more than 30 miles an hour, the brain would collapse. The issue is, though, we are drowning ourselves in trivia and excess in amongst all the information that we need. And I'm going to introduce you to what I call the medial forebrain pleasure circuit. It's a bit of a mouthful, I'm afraid, but all I want to say to you is the internet and all the technologies that we are developing are fantastic ways of producing a drug essentially called dopamine and oxytocin. And they basically travel into the medial forebrain pleasure circuit, and they light up with success and approval. They just love it. And social media and the internet are ideally suited to stimulating this effect. Now, they've got a big brother as well called serotonin. The human mind is always a battle between the top-down and bottom-down process. The top-down process tell us what we expect the world to look like. The bottom-up processes say, I'm getting more information here, and this is what the world is actually like. And within your brain, your senses report back roughly what the brain expects. Everything's fine. But when the two don't match, your consciousness is alerted to it. Serotonin is involved, and it mediates this surprise or distraction. The problem is it keeps you on a high along with dopamine and oxytocin while you're resolving that. Now, interestingly, when this process goes wrong, it causes problems. One theory of autism is that it's caused when your brain is hypersensitive to unexpected changes. Your attention is constantly drawn to tiny, inconsequential details, and the world seems a buzzing confusion. And misunderstandings can be caused by your brain not paying enough attention to the bottom-up details and making stuff up out of your own expectations. It's also possible that depression is caused by an inability to update beliefs about the world in the presence of new information. If you don't have enough serotonin in your brain, you can't change your understanding of things easily enough, and that's how you get sometimes into depression. Okay, so we're in a bit of an unequal struggle, really. We're trying to keep up with technology, more information. We've got less time to process it. And we've got hyper-connected lives that have benefits and disadvantage. But the problem is that technology is weakening our energy reserves. And those of you who work for a long time in a high stress and high impact environment will know that. And if you look at a Pew survey from the United States, you'll know that, that people can capitalize on new technologies. They can find their way through large amounts of information as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, they're not seeing what it's doing to their brain and also to the rest of their bodies. And I meet a lot of colleagues who I classify as having eye disorder. And basically, they're trending towards OCD, narcissism, addiction, or even ADHD, which is really manifested through their overuse of technology. And if you look around your colleagues, that's an obsessive need normally to check for text messages, a desperate desire to constantly update your Facebook status, or even a near addiction to iPhone games. They're all manifestations of eye disorder. But the problem is basically an endless stream of prompts and notifications is actually messing up your brain and also your work and more general life. And the problem is you get a reduced mental bandwidth that leads to a loss of cognitive control and tunneling. And what you do is you trade long-term benefit for short-term relief. You want to feel better, you want more dopamine in your brain. And we found in an experiment that some of our Chinese students, for example, who do have internet addiction disorder, showed that actually they have reduced grey matter in their brains and white matter in key areas of the brain associated with cognitive control and also goal-directed behavior. They can't actually produce results because they are so distracted by this addiction. What it leads to, I'm afraid to say, is bad decision-making and even poor risk assessments. And the problem we've got here is we tend to miss the obvious. And in missing the obvious, of course, people say, well, what's wrong with that person? You don't know because the person himself doesn't know either. The real problem is we've got an issue with attention. Everything that we have in technology nowadays is designed to grab your attention. Everything is designed to alert you to something happening. It's strengthening our ability to scan information rapidly and efficiently, and we're getting further into fast technologies. The faster those technologies get, the less able we are to cope. The demands on the brain have increased, and there is real mental effort required to sustain focus. That depletes the glucose in your brain that's needed to feed neural energy. And that wealth of information creates a poverty of attention and too many distractions. Now, if I tell you that 2.9 billion people are on social media at the moment, that introduces a lot of novelty and surprise, and also a lot of interruptions and distractions. And I'm afraid to say that digital distractions create near constant cognitive overload in your brains. Evidence suggests that reliance on our technologies, particularly our mobile technologies, is shortening our attention span. It's down to 8 seconds now, which I have to tell you is shorter than that of a fish. Now, when we've all got computers in our pockets, there's lots of things to do. We never get bored, but unfortunately, we are missing stuff amongst the noise. And I will say to you, if you're on a train, how can you read a sign of a station as you go past it at speed? You can't, is the answer. And we're missing some of the big stuff with all the trivia around us. To give you an example, a known unread message in your inbox reduces your IQ by 10 points. Just knowing you've got it, the fact you haven't read it. Twitter, if you're actually on Twitter, it produces 56% more neural activity in areas associated with memory formation. So you've got less than half of your attention on what's important when you're reading a Twitter message or a thread. The basic problem is when you're overloaded with technology, your white matter bulks up. That means your attention, control, and executive function, okay, takes over, okay, at the expense of the grey matter, which, as I've said, is the decision and decision-making and thinking function. I have students who I work with at the moment. They can barely concentrate for more than 3 minutes at a stretch if they've got their notifications and their lights going off on their mobile phones. And even those that don't actually have their phones turned on, they're worried about what's going on, and they're worried about their status when that phone is off. And memories are compromised when we let constant interruptions distract us. The brain's memory and organization centers can be damaged when flooded with stress hormones, and it's a common reaction to interruptions and multitasking. And you'll find that leads in turn to problems with capacity, recall, and complex problem solving. Now, areas of the brain that relate to attention, control, and executive function bulk up this white matter that I told you about. They're the extra nerve cells that are built for speed at the expense of the neuron-rich gray matter that's used for problem solving and cognition. And the result is that many high school students in Europe and in the United States can't actually synthesize or assess information, express complex thoughts, or analyze arguments because of that. As you can see, what does that do? It reduces productivity and increases mistakes by 50% over time. And the problem is it's a vicious cycle because it leads you, if you are weak and your energy level's low, for more interruption and distraction. So the dopamine circuit can actually fire up again, and the serotonin as well. Reading books on a device. I have to tell you that if you read books on a device, then you won't retain the information that you have there. It's all frontal lobe stuff. It'll stay there for as long as you think you need that, but it won't go into your memory circuits. We've done scans of people where we have them reading a book and we have them reading from digital media. And I can tell you in every case, the memory circuit part of the brain lights up when people are reading a book or a document. They do not light up when they're reading from an iPhone, an iPad, or any other digital device. Just think, when you want to check a document, you actually print it off, don't you? There's a reason for that. Oh, all you're saying is kids are good at this, they're digital natives. I have to tell you, we borrowed some kids with the parents' permission, and it's the same with the kids. Our brain is not plastic enough. So if you want your kids to learn, I'm afraid they've got to get back to books again. It's a far more efficient way of actually learning. I've mentioned already, within the modern world, because we can access information very easily, we're not storing it quite so well either. What does that lead to? Inability to load up the processor that is your brain, and so complex problem solving becomes very difficult because you don't practice it. Now, one of the issues that I'm concerned about at the moment is teen suicides in the United Kingdom. It's a study I'm doing. Why have we got more teen suicides at the moment? I'm afraid to say one of the lines that we're looking at is throughout their teenage years, kids are associated with the internet and with their mobile phones. They're constantly showing off their best pictures, their best experiences, best photos, all that sort of thing. So the dopamine levels are very high during a time when teenage brains are actually just getting to grips with the world. They are malleable, and this dopamine high continues through to the end of, say, high school. When they go to university or they get into work, people say, oh, that's interesting. That's you on the internet. That's you in reality. They don't seem to match. And we think this is causing confusion, and it's causing, obviously conflict in some people's minds. So interesting. If you use the internet and you use technology excessively, this is what you end up with. I won't go through all these things. You won't be subject to them, but just have a look at some of the things that we're looking at here. There's some quite interesting fragility issues associated with a lot of these, and more or less you can see them. And to add to that, you've got the physical stuff associated with impaired vision, hearing, headaches, we all get it, neck and back strain, and tendency, I'm afraid, to obesity if you spend too much time hanging around technology in the way we're doing it at the moment. Okay, so we've got to get work, home and leisure right. We're not doing it at the moment, I have to tell you. Longer working hours, they're counterproductive, and we've got to be goal orientated in many ways. That you've got to have priorities and values taking place over duties and locations, and we're finding that now with COVID. Productivity and outcomes over hours worked. Think of the balance between the two. And work is where you go to, not something that you do. And you really should schedule work around your life, not the other way around. And get out into the real world. Do what 50,000 years of caveman has done and cavewoman has done. Don't do what 2,000 years of civilization and 100 years of digital technology has done. And I'm going to mainline on sleep here, I have to tell you. Sleep is stress and strain therapy. It shuts down the elements of your essentially are a means of defragging your brain. Just as the computer gets defragged, your dreams are there to defrag you. It clears the macromolecular junk out by dilating the lymphatic vessels, if you want to know, and it rewires your brain to prevent overcrowding. If you deprive people of sleep, if you give them 4 hours a night, after a week, their hunger hormone, the ghrelin, it's called ghrelin, soars, you eat more, you drink stuff. The carbohydrate and sugar consumption rockets at that stage so that the glucose can't be released, almost to diabetic levels. So watch out if you lose sleep. So stay off the electronics before bed, and don't give in to this transcranial magnetic stimulation that you get from devices that are always on. And I have to tell you that round-the-clock exposure to artificial light, even low-level light from TV screens and also technology screens, can throw off our circadian rhythms, and you have negative effects in terms of depression, mood disorders, sleep loss, and I'm afraid increased risk of cancer. And we also get a situation where if you lose sleep and you get stressed, okay, you resort to coffee, Coke, high-calorie food, drugs in some cases. Yet again, that keeps you wired up, and it's a self-fulfilling vicious cycle again. And I'm afraid to say also that if you don't clear out the plaque that exists in your brain, just like you have plaque on teeth, we think there's a connection now to Alzheimer's. So you really do have to get your sleep. There's no question about that. If you don't, all these things are going to come to you. And I'm beginning to think now that if you don't think about this as employers, you're going to end up in a situation where we're going to get litigation in future. Okay, let's have a think about the effect of technology on children, because we almost all have them nowadays, one way or the other. What we have to remember is that children's brains are very malleable and still developing. So digital exposure is very important to them because their immediate environment determines the kind of attention that they develop. Give an example. Reading is fully immersive for children. Television isn't. It distracts them and it leaves little to the imagination. If you go to the internet and gaming, of course, consistent attention is impossible. Having said that, there's no evidence that gaming affects a child's psychological development, other than the fact, of course, it is totally superficial. It is not immersive. And I always say the difference between reading, for example, and doing things on the internet or in gaming is the difference between scuba diving and jet skiing. And it has the same effect on young brains. Scuba diving, you're fully immersed, you look at the detail, you're having to concentrate on what you're doing. Jet skiing, you're just going across the top of things all the time. Again, if we have children too aligned to technology, they don't learn so well. We've done experiments with children in class that show that if you remove the technology for them, not only are they more stimulated, entertained, their brains actually absorb more knowledge and they can do better tasks when they're at it. Okay, home working. Everybody says this has been brilliant during COVID. I have to say, I'm picking up quite a lot of problems associated with home working. Okay, the social dislocation, something that you only miss when you're not getting the social interaction. Body language at the moment is becoming totally forced. And you'll know the number of times you use the camera off and mute function in order to make that happen. Now, digital immersion at home is now causing all of the problems that I spoke to you psychologically earlier on. You just can't get away from it. And one of the tragedies that I'm finding is what I call digital neglect. Because people are so immersed in their digital media, you're getting pressured children. And we're finding that if you're affluent, in other words, middle class, and you're in this digital immersion mode, that the kids of these children are 2 to 3 times more likely to do depression, alcohol, or drugs in their teens. And they spend a lot of their time online in gaming or fantasy worlds. So be warned in this regard. It does affect your kids. We're finding drops in creativity because the dynamic interaction is not occurring, and the emotional quotient of people is being reduced all the time. And a lot of people now in some of the firms that I'm working with, particularly in the City of London, we're finding they're burning out very quickly because of this digital overload, and are actually saying we wish we could commute, because actually that gives us a break between work and home. They're missing commuting, for heaven's sake. And again, I get back to the point, you know, where does company responsibility come in here? Is the company responsible for the seat the person sits in when they work for you, their mental state? How do you monitor that? There are all sorts of things. So if you see your co-workers with any of these, it's a sure sign that technology is really getting to them. And we really need to know, I think, some of the causes, some of the symptoms that lead to these issues. If you see any of these, then you need to be pressing the alarm bell for some of your people, particularly when they're working from remote. Finally, I just wanted to tell you, I think, where we need to develop the human interface. People learn in different ways, and as you can see, there are various ways that they can learn. They can learn visually, by listening, they can read and write. But the real jump ahead now is, as I hinted earlier, in the virtual reality space, where you can learn by doing. And most people learn most quickly and most deeply with that latter way of learning. All the others contribute, and everybody does a bit of everything, but that is the way ahead, to be able to actually replicate learning experience for people. Remember the quarterback, remember the combat pilot. And the opportunities, I think, in the space are these. We have to improve the way we dovetail in with people's cognition, the way they visualize information, the way they visualize problems, which leads to insight and knowledge. At the moment, we're not leading directly into people's psychological portals to enable them to do that. Again, how do we build better visualizations? Because data is a scary thing. It's also a thing that's very difficult to moderate. It's very difficult to mediate with it and filter out what we really need. And again, I get back to my point that systems are built very much for the machine end of things right now. They're not built for the humans themselves. So better machine-human collaboration in order to take in the psychological and practical reasons for the way in which we use machines and can exploit them more quickly and more effectively. And I think essentially we're in a 2D world when we're looking at the interfaces for data. With virtual reality, with immersion, with all the sorts of wearables and inserts that we've got, we can look for novel interfaces now to be able to see how we can do that. And finally, whatever I've told you, okay, it's only 50 minutes. Whatever I've told you, please expect the unexpected. It's both a risk and it's an opportunity. And thank you so much for listening in. And if you have any questions, if I can actually sort of get it right, I'll look on the text and we can perhaps go for that. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, boys and girls, please put them on the chat and I'll be very happy to answer them in the time we've got left. Okay, we've got one question. It says, how will the strategic competition between the United States and Russia, I think, no, it's China and Russia, affect our businesses? As I think I hinted earlier, I think we are heading for a two-block world, and I think there will be intense competition, both commercially and strategically. And there'll be lots of tectonic friction, I think, between the developed countries of the West and also China and Russia. There'll be also a lot of technological competition. Remember what I said at the start, I think in a connected but contested world, we're going to have to be able to cooperate where we can, but compete where we must. But bear in mind also, we're not just going to be subject to IP theft. We're going to have to put up with that. We're also going to have to deal, I think, with quite a lot of tariffs and sanctions where we get it wrong or we're seen to get it wrong. So you have to be very enabled legally, practically, and seek the help of your own state organization to help you mediate this very difficult relationship that we're going to have in future, I believe, in this digital space. And don't forget, we're in an arms race. Every country now is looking to get ahead in terms of technology. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's all the time we've got now. Thank you again very much for listening. If you do have any questions or you need any further guidance about what I've been saying, it's a quick gallop through. Please contact me through Creatio, and I'll very much look forward to seeing you.